Dr. Thomas, are we live and ready to roll?
Yes.
We are
Yes,
live.
ma'am, we are live.
Okay. All right. We'll call the meeting to order at 6:03. Dr. Thomas, if you can do a roll call for us.
Mr. Davis,
Here.
Mr. Stevens, Miss Davis,
Here.
Dr. Yeager,
Here.
Dr. Dykeman,
Here.
Mr. Worthy, Dr. Gant,
Here.
Dr. Knox,
Here.
Dr. Maddox.
Okay. Thank you. Going to open the floor to amend or adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so any discussion about adopting the agenda? Okay, all in favor for the record, Dr. Thomas, if you would do roll call for us.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens, Miss Davis,
Yes.
oops, I'm sorry, something happened there. Dr. Dykeman,
Yes.
Dr. Yeager,
Yes.
Mr. Worthy, Dr. Gant,
Yes.
Dr. Knox,
Yes.
Dr. Maddox.
Okay, thank you. So the agenda is printed before us. Item 3 is our FY 2021 millage rate discussion. Dr. Thomas and Mr. Greiner, I'll turn the floor over to you.
And I'll turn it over to Mr. Griner.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gant. Thank you, Dr. Thomas. This is our third and final millage rate hearing is required by the state of Georgia. So Lisa, if you could go to the next slide, please. Again, why we're here tonight is that anytime there's an assessment of property that results in an increase required by law, you have to calculate what's called a rollback millage rate. That calculation is done by the tax commissioner. Of course, I reviewed it. We agreed on the calculation. So under state law, if you accept the rollback rate, you're not required to do anything else. There is no hearings at all. You know, in our case with our budget, with state austerity over the last several years, and then, you know, it finally got stabilized. And again, we're facing budget cuts. Our millage rate is stated 20 mills, which is the maximum allowed by the state of Georgia. So since we don't roll it back, we're required to have 3 public hearings. So this is our third. We had 2 on June the 9th, 1 tonight. These are all advertised in accordance with what the Department of Revenue issues in their guidance, all signed off by the tax commissioner. So the tentative millage rate was set back on May 21 at 20 mills, no change from the previous year. Again, I think Dr. Knox made this point at the last public hearing that taxes are going up because assessed values went up, not because we raised the millage rate. Again, by state law, we can't raise it any higher. We're at the max, which is 20 mills. So reassessment of properties produced an overall property tax increase of 5.74%. In order the rollback rate calculated to be, which would eliminate that 5.74% increase to be 18.914 mills, or a difference of 0.086 mills, which would impact our budget by almost $5 million if we roll back. So you can see why we're not advocating a rollback. Again, some property owners will see an increase, some won't, depending on what happens with their property. If it goes up, you know, they will see an increase. If it stays the same, no. Some will go up higher than others. So it's kind of across the board. It's not a straight, everybody's getting a 5.74% increase. That's just the total increase. And again, you know, in order for us to create a budget that's not even balanced this year, because we're having to use fund balance, you know, it's imperative that, you know, of course, we don't roll back because of the significant decrease to our budget. On the next slide, I just have the history of the millage rate for the school district. Value-wise, you can see, as Ms. Evans pointed out in our budget hearing, Yeah, we have been fortunate with a steady increase in our tax digest, especially the last couple of years. Last year, a little bit higher than this year. I think we were over 8%, close to 9% last year. We're 7.4, 7.5 this year. So the value of a mill for the school district is about $4.5 million at this point in time. So that generates roughly, before the commission, we pay to the tax commissioner's office to collect the taxes by state law. It generates roughly around $91 million. Then of course we pay that, so it gets it down into the high 80s, 80 million, 87, 88 million once we pay the commission to the tax commissioner. That's really all I had, Dr. Gant. The next slide just shows what our final timeline on this is. Again, we advertise the 5-year tax digest history as required by law, which also requires when you're going to set the final millage rate. We've got that set to happen on June 25th at a call board meeting at 6 o'clock. So there's really 2 things we're doing at that meeting, separate items. Where the final budget will be presented for adoption and the final millage rate. So it's really 2 separate motions. The millage rate is the piece that, it's been advertised to be adopted on June 25th. Once that's adopted, of course, then the steps follow where the tax commissioner will get the digest certified. Preliminary notices have already went out. I think the bills are due normally in October in Clarke County. So we're right in line. The Athens Clarke County government, I noticed, is adopting their final budget on June 25th as well. I think they changed their date actually today. It may have always been June 25th, but for some reason I thought it was earlier than that. But I know today I saw something or yesterday where they've changed their adoption to June 25th as well now. So we're in stride with what they're doing. So by June 30th, we'll be able to get the tax digest certified at the state. And I'm sorry, I forgot to ask Lisa, do we have any comments on the millage rate?
We did.
Okay. All right. And I don't think, is there any community? I think it's just us, right? Or do we have?
No, there is one community person, I think.
Oh, okay. So yeah, if we have any questions from the community, I'll be glad to answer those. I'm sorry, I looked earlier, didn't see anybody.
Mr. Marsh?
Oh, okay. So yes, I want to call to ask, I'm speaking with regards to this budget, in proposed budget here and the proposed millage rate increase. Clarke County is one of the highest spending school districts in the state. And according to the, whatever this is, the financial something, or the economic, I cannot remember the name of the thing now, but according to the state, basically, you have very high spending and very low results. So money is not what generates results. At this point in time, here in Clarke County, with everybody hurting, a 5%, 5.4% increase seems to be almost a slap in the face of the Clarke County taxpayers. I want to urge you to go ahead and just accept the rollback rate, cut your budget, and concentrate on educating children as opposed to all of these other spending things that are not providing the students of Clarke County with a quality education. With all of the resources that Clarke County has here, we should be among one of the best districts in the state, but instead we're down near the bottom. And I think that comes from having focus scattered across too many different areas and not focusing on the primary job of the school district, which is educating the students of Clarke County. Thank you.
And we're in statement.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Mr. Greiner, I know during our last, I think, budget millage rate hearing, and you may have already said this, so forgive me if I'm asking something you've already said, but I think there was some discussion around the actual rate remaining the same. And the percentage, of course, with the money that has come in, the total amount being more, but the millage rate being the same. I mean, I do hear Mr. Marsh's, I think, concern about the millage rate itself, but I think I was just trying to recall our last discussion that related to his question.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Gatt. Yeah, the millage rate itself, I think Dr. Knox made this point. The millage rate itself, it's kind of a misnomer when you hear property tax increase, because we're not increasing the millage rate. It's just the fact that the property values have increased, which generate additional tax. Of course, what Mr. Marsh is suggesting is that, by law, you can, the rollback rates created so there is no increase across the board. So if you so desire, you can establish the millage rate at that lower rate, and then it basically eliminates any increased valuations that may have been done by the assessor's office. It basically gets you back to what your tax was last year, because you have a lower millage rate than the 20 mills. By leaving it at 20 mills, any value assessment created by the assessor's office is going to generate additional tax. The only way to offset that, of course, is to do a lower millage rate. I think with where we're at with the state austerity cuts again coming into play, there's so many things that are not funded out of the QBE funding formula. We mentioned in the budget hearing your classified health insurance increases. None of that's funded. I think a lot of stuff, and Mr. Worthy can chime in, I think this is his point he makes quite often, is that the funding mix between the state and the local piece is not where it's intended by law to be. So I think there's a lot of stuff we have to cover with local taxes, which is one reason why that millage rate is stayed at 20 mills, to be able to support, the offset that we're not getting from the state. I believe, Mr. Worthy, that's a point you make quite often.
You're correct. And also, I can understand why people can be concerned about some things in terms of their taxes that they're paying. I pay high taxes too. But my point is this: when you look at the millage rate, it's 20 mills, and we can't go beyond that unless you float a referendum. Now, I'm not about to support that. But when you look at it realistically, the only millage rate that's going to sustain this budget is 20 mills. Now, having said that, and I think I've asked you before, Chris, when you look at it realistically, the number of employees that we have in this school district, and also the number of teachers, I think it's something like 1,000 plus teachers. And how many teachers? It's somewhere around 300 or 400 teachers that are actually paid out of local tax dollars. Am I correct on that, Chris?
Yes, sir. And you also have to look at our paraprofessionals. The only thing that's funded by the state is our kindergarten paraprofessionals. Any additional paraprofessionals we have in the system is totally out of local funding. The state only gives us funding for the kindergarten paraprofessionals.
And not much.
And keep in mind, you're working off a QBE funding formula that hasn't been adjusted for inflation since it was originally set in place in 1985. So, I mean, you're talking about 35 years of no adjustments for any. So, I mean, it's QBE kind of, when you look at other states, I think we're fortunate that we have QBE, but there are certain factors of it. It puts more of the emphasis on having to use local tax dollars to cover stuff that probably originally was intended to be covered with state dollars. But yes, sir, you're correct. I mean, it only funds a certain level, and it goes back to what we talked about as well as keeping class sizes lower. In order to do that, you really can't use the teachers that are allotted through QBE. You have to kind of go above and beyond that to keep that class size where you need to be. So it does create more local dollars funding those positions.
Okay.
Thank you.
I
Thank you,
was-
Mr. Worthy and Mr. Greiner. Mr. Davis,
Yeah, I've got
and then Dr. Yeager.
I've got three comments and to direct both to John Marsh and also the public as a large. One is that I think if you look at the education of students from low-income families throughout the state, I don't think we're doing such a good job. And again, I'm talking statewide, and so I know some districts seem to be doing better because they have less of those students that face challenges both at home and you know, environmental as well as opportunities. So I just don't think we're doing that good a job in the state. The second thing I do want to comment is that, you know, we all like our state taxes cut. Well, if you cut state taxes and then you cut monies for education on the local level, then you're really creating a further squeeze. And you know, clearly you would like to think that people are going into the classroom because they, you know, they want to be there regardless of the pay scale and the benefits associated with it. But with 92% of our budget being people, you know, it's not, it's more difficult than other operations that are not so driven by personnel. And then the last thing is that we actually do have a freeze, it seems to me. And I don't know, Chris, if you were able to find anything more about it, but I checked again. I'm 69 years old, and my property tax, my school taxes are frozen at a certain amount, regardless of the increase in the value of my property. And I didn't ask for that. And so, so presumably, since I didn't ask for it, and I feel kind of sheepish. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, finding a $20 bill in the middle of the road. I mean, I'm going to pick it up and be thankful, but I know that whoever dropped it will probably needs that $20 more than I do. I just don't know who that $20 belongs to. So I just have those comments that kind of make me reflect on our budget and the fact that we need pretty much every dime that we've got. Thank you.
Dr. Yeager?
I was just going to say that I pulled up the Department of Revenue website and looked at the property tax millage rates around the state, and Fulton County, for example, is higher than ours. Lots of counties are in the 20-ish range. So I don't think it's unusual. It's not like we're taxing at a higher rate than a lot of other places.
So correct.
Yeah, and I'll point out, I think Fulton, I've heard this story before. They're over 20 because they got grandfathered in at some point. Mike may Mr. Pruitt may know more of that history, but I've heard that story with Fulton before. I think before the cap went in place, they were actually over 20 and they got grandfathered in. They're one of the few, if not the only district in the state that's over 20 mils. I think they got grandfathered, or they may have even done, like Mr. Worthy said, you can do a referendum, but I would never advise doing that either. But I can't remember Fulton's story. There's a reason why they're allowed to be over 20 though.
They're all grandfathered in, to my understanding.
Gotcha.
Chris.
Yes, sir. Mr. Worthy.
I wanted to mention something that Greg Davis said. Greg, I think you said 92% of the budget is in people. I thought it was more like 84%. What percent would we put in personnel, Chris?
Yeah, I think it's more. I calculated that at some point, Mr. Worthy. I think it's 85 to 86% this year.
Yeah, and I know that is high. Well, I'm thinking of my school finance course that I took some years ago, which was somewhere around 74, 75%. If you go higher than that, you put in too much money in personnel, but you have to hire people to get the job done.
Yeah, and a lot of that, Mr. Worthy, goes back, I think what got brought up in the budget hearing, classified health insurance and TRS. The classified health insurance used to be totally funded by the state. So when you started adding those expenses in, of course, your percentage went up as well. So, and the TRS percentage going up, all that's increased that percentage of salary and benefits that make up the budget. So.
And some people probably realize this and some not realizing this, but some classified employees like bus drivers and maybe some of the nutritional workers, they aren't full-time workers, but yet the school district paying their health insurance. And I don't think we get any money from the state for that. Am I correct on that, Chris?
Yes, sir, that is correct. Yeah, classified employees is fully local dollars. The 11,340 I mentioned that we pay for any classified employee who actually has health insurance. Now, if they don't have health insurance, we don't pay anything, but if they do have health insurance, yeah, that's fully local dollars. No state help on. Certified, we do get help on through the QBE formula, but not classified employees.
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Any additional questions
I have
from
an-
community?
oh,
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say I have an unrelated question that I wanted to ask during the budget hearing, but we were talking about some other stuff, so I didn't ask it. Can you update us on the LSGT funds for this year? I know that was a big issue last year. Are the LSGT grant funds, what category do they fall in, and are they in place in this budget?
Yes, Dr. Yeager, they're in the budget. I'm trying to think. They should be under the instruction, under the function instruction. I can look at my notebook and tell you real quick. Look real quick. Hold up. I think they may not be. Let me look under instruction. It may be improvement of instruction. I know there's roughly.
I looked in the obvious places and I couldn't find it, so.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I don't think it's instruction. Hold on just a second. They're in there though, I promise.
Okay.
I just gotta put my hands on them. It may be under.
There's training. I found training, but I didn't find the actual grant.
Yeah, there's actually one line item in there, and then Mr. Harris works with our local school governance teams on, trying to help them with the allocation and trying to make sure we're using it, the best way. I mean, they of course they come up with what they want to use it for, and then we kind of, guide through. It's under improvement of instruction. Dr. Yeager, it's the second item. If you go to operating for improvement of instruction, it's almost $600,000 we have in there.
Okay.
It's 595, 380 is the exact amount that's in the budget. And of course, that's for all the schools. And then, like I mentioned, Mr. Harris works with the schools on,
Okay.
making sure that's allocated, and then based also on what the schools, what they come to him with, and then it's kind of, he works through that with them.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. Any other questions or points of discussion? I don't see any hands across my screen, but I just want to be sure. And from the public, I don't see any hands up, but I want to double check. Okay. All right. Mr. Greiner, is that it with does that conclude the millage rate?
Yes, ma'am, Dr. Gant. I'm good on my end.
Okay.
Yep. The next will just be the final vote on the 25th. Yep.
Okay. If there are no more questions, we'll move to item 4, which is adjournment. Open the floor for a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. I can see everybody. If all in favor, if you would just raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed, the same sign. And any abstaining. All right. Our meeting is adjourned at 6:27. Thank you.